You spend a lot of time lying, still staring at the slow crawl of sunlight across a blank ceiling, listening for footsteps that never come. Hospitals are strange places, too bright, too cold the air, thick with disinfectant, and things left unsaid. You can measure the depth of someone's love by how often they visit, or, in your case, by how easily they don't. When you first got sick, you told yourself you'd be strong, that you'd beat it, whatever it was, whatever name the doctors finally settled on. You expected your parents to appear at your side ready to fight. But they always seemed to have something else to do: a conference call, a spa appointment, an emergency sale on flat-screen TVs. They brought flowers sometimes. They posted selfies from the hospital lobby evidence for the family group chat, but never stayed long enough to see if you actually smiled. You learned to watch for their arrival the way a dog watches the door, hopeful and half ashamed. You'd prop yourself up, fix your hair, rehearse a joke. Sometimes you'd even practice looking sicker just to see if it would draw concern. It never did. They always left in a hurry, promising to check in soon, their footsteps echoing down linoleum hallways, growing fainter with each visit. Some nurses became your stand-in family, sneaking you extra pudding cups, fussing over your blood pressure. When you tried to explain your parents' absence, you made it sound like a scheduling issue, not a symptom of something colder. But alone in the dark, you couldn't pretend. There's a kind of loneliness that gets under your skin, that hums behind your heartbeat. You stop reaching out for affection. You stop expecting it altogether. One afternoon, as a fresh bouquet of wilting daisies slumped in a plastic vase, you caught a nurse rolling her eyes after your parents swept out in a flurry of phone calls. The nurse muttered, "Some people never learn." It stung, but also comforted you. At least someone else saw the truth: you weren't crazy. You weren't ungrateful. You were just disposable. The realization was a cold, quiet thing. You tucked it under your pillow and let it harden into resolve. You started keeping a journal, scribbling between treatments, tracking symptoms, and stray thoughts. Sometimes your entries blurred into letters, some addressed to your parents, others to yourself, a few written for a future that might never arrive. You wrote about the days you needed a hand to hold, the nights you wanted someone to say, "It's going to be okay." You wrote about the little indignities, the forgotten birthdays, the get well soon cards with someone else's name. You wrote until the words stopped hurting. And then, in the dead of night, you decided to stop waiting for love that wouldn't come. The sadness burned away, leaving something sharper. You realized you weren't really angry, not anymore. Just done. Done hoping, done begging, done spinning excuses for people who didn't want to show up. It's strange, the freedom that comes from giving up on old illusions. Your world shrank to a single bed, a journal, and the slow, patient clockwork of your own breath. You let go of the idea that your parents might surprise you, swoop in at the last minute, finally see the person you'd become. That moment was never coming. The truth was bare, and you faced it alone. But you also saw a different truth glimmering behind the pain. Your worth was not measured by their presence or their praise. You were still here, still writing, still you. You remember the moment you knew you'd be saying goodbye, but not to your parents. It was another hospital evening, the city's sunset leaking through the blinds, painting stripes across the white bedsheets. Your body felt foreign, weak, weightless, like a passenger in someone else's skin. Your parents arrived late as usual, offering excuses as thin as the paper gowns they never bothered to put on. They stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, holding a box of luxury chocolates, the kind you'd never liked, but they always bought for gifts. There was no talk of fear, no quiet squeeze of your hand, just an exchange of surface pleasantries and a quick check of their watches. You tried to joke about your IV pole, "Guess I'm finally mobile," but your mom barely looked up from her phone. After a few minutes, they announced they had another important appointment. Your father patted your foot as if you were a family dog. Your mother leaned in for a kiss air, only lips grazing the edge of your cheek. "Hang in there, sweetheart," she said already, halfway to the door. You listened to their voices fade down the hall, laughter bouncing against tile. You wondered what they could possibly find so funny. A nurse came in after they'd left, tidied up, checked your chart. She asked if you wanted to call anyone, and you shook your head. What would be the point? You'd learn to stop chasing comfort from those who only offered it when convenient. You watch the clock tick. You listen to the rattle of distant wheels, the soft hush of nurses' shoes. The world outside your door shrank to hospital sounds and the steady drip of your IV. It wasn't dramatic your last night. No storm, no tears, no heartfelt reconciliations. You spent the time making lists in your mind, things you wished you'd said, things you wished you'd done, moments you wished you'd mattered more. But the regrets felt less sharp now, dulled by acceptance. You even found a strange kind of humor in it all. What would your parents do when you were gone? Would they finally notice the empty space? Would they remember to water the houseplants? You slept in fragments, waking to the soft glow of machines, the hum of life moving on just outside your door. You dreamed of beaches of laughter, of years that never really belonged to you. In one dream, your parents stood on a distant shore, waving and smiling, but never crossing the sand to reach you. When morning came, you watched the sun struggle through the window. A doctor came in, spoke softly, and you nodded. You understood. There's a kind of peace that comes from knowing the end is near a final exhale after a lifetime of holding your breath. The nurse squeezed your hand, eyes warm and sad. For the first time in months, you felt truly seen. Your parents arrived after you'd slipped back into sleep. They stood over you, voices low, already discussing logistics, what to tell the family, where to park, how soon they could get the house appraised. You wanted to sit up to shout, to ask if they'd ever truly known you at all. But you didn't. You let yourself drift, a gentle current pulling you away from the noise. In those last moments, you made a decision. If you couldn't change the way your parents saw you in life, maybe you could change the way they remembered you in death. You pictured the letter you'd been drafting, the words that might finally reach them, sharp as glass, soft as rain. You felt yourself relax, not with resignation, but with quiet resolve. Sometimes the final word is the only one that matters. You slipped away quietly without spectacle, your parents missing your last breath by minutes. They never knew what you'd been planning, what legacy you'd chosen to leave. As the machines fell silent, as the nurses bowed their heads, your story was already starting to change. Your passing felt more like a formality than a tragedy to the people who'd once called you family. In the days that followed, your hospital bed was stripped, your belongings folded into neat, impersonal piles. Flowers tossed, cards unopened, the last bits of you swept up and carted away. Outside your room, the world spun on. The doctors signed paperwork. The nurses exchanged looks. For your parents, it was all logistics and legalese. You watched from wherever you lingered in memory, as your parents sat across from the funeral director, stone-faced and impatient. Your father signed forms without reading them. Your mother focused on floral arrangements and costs, never on memories. The service was swift and sterile, a box checked on the to-do list of their grief. There were no speeches, no slideshows of your childhood, just a handful of relatives and colleagues all dressed in polite, uncomfortable black. When your parents thanked the guests, it sounded like closing a business deal. Afterwards, in the quiet aftermath, your parents turned to what really interested them, the inheritance. It became a silent competition between them, each pretending not to care about the numbers, each waiting for the lawyer's call. You could almost picture them at home, rifling through old files, dusting off photo albums, in case they needed to prove how much you meant to them. But you knew better. Their concern was never for your memory, just for the assets attached to your name. Somewhere in a drawer they never opened, your favorite notebook sat unopened. A nurse had slipped it into your things, not knowing the weight it carried. In its pages were letters to everyone who had ever mattered and to those who never had. The last letter, sealed in a plain envelope, was addressed to your parents in a careful, unhurried hand. You saw them arrive at the lawyer's office, dressed for drama, black coats, sunglasses, a performance of sorrow. The waiting room buzzed with quiet anticipation, your parents whispering, rehearsing their lines. The lawyer greeted them with practiced warmth, ushered them inside, and began the formalities. Your parents wore their grief like a costume, but their eyes were sharp, hungry for the bottom line. You imagined the moment the will was read. Your parents sitting up straighter, listening for their names for the numbers they assumed would change everything. You imagine their surprise when, instead of a simple payout, the lawyer produced your letter sealed and waiting. For a second, you hoped their hands shook as they reached for it. You hoped the truth pressed heavy against their skin. Your absence was a quiet echo in the room, but your presence filled every space between words. Your parents, expecting only money, were about to inherit something far more difficult: honesty. For the first time, you wondered if they would recognize your handwriting, or if the years had erased even that. It was almost funny how death changed nothing and everything all at once. How the people who had let you slip away now scrambled to claim what you'd left behind. The world, watching from the sidelines, saw a family mourning, but you knew better. You saw the truth that some losses are only felt when the will is read, when the locks are changed, when a letter lands heavy on the table. As the ink on the paperwork dried, as your parents fumbled to hide their impatience, you felt lighter. Even gone, you had one last card to play, one final chance to shape the story they'd tried so hard to control. The will is read on a Thursday in a conference room with too much glass and too little warmth. Your parents sit side by side, their bodies angled just apart, enough to betray the secret friction always lurking beneath the surface. The lawyer is the kind who wears bow ties and polishes his glasses too often. He glances at your parents, then at the your folder resting at the center of the table, like a bomb waiting to go off. Your parents make a show of mourning, nodding gravely at every platitude about your irreplaceable presence. Your father dabs his eyes with a tissue unused, still creased. Your mother sighs, lips pursed, checking her watch between solemn glances. They have both become experts at performance, and you almost admire their commitment. Almost. The lawyer speaks slowly, his words measured, deliberate. He summarizes your life in 3 lines, lists your assets, then pauses for effect. Your parents lean forward. For a moment, you're sure they believe this will be the clean break they've been waiting for. You imagine them picturing vacation homes, new cars, maybe an upgrade to the kitchen they never let you cook in. But the lawyer doesn't mention numbers. Instead, he slides the envelope across the table, your name and theirs, penned in blue ink. Your parents stare at it, confused this isn't part of the script. The lawyer clears his throat, explains that the letter must be read before any distribution of assets. Legal requirement, he says, voice flat. You see irritation flicker in your father's eyes. Your mother's fingers twitch against her purse. Your father is the first to break the silence. He opens the envelope with a practiced hand, extracting the letter you wrote on one of your loneliest nights long after hope had run out, when clarity had become your only companion. He skims the first lines, expecting instructions, maybe a message of forgiveness or gratitude. He doesn't expect the raw honesty. You know he feels it immediately. His jaw tightens, his eyes stop scanning and start reading. Your mother peers over his shoulder, mouth tightening with every word. The room seems to shrink as your truth fills the air. There's no melodrama, no grand accusation, just the story of what it felt like to need them and be met with silence. You recall birthdays alone, hospital visits spent staring at the ceiling, holidays measured in polite absence. You write about the hope that shrank to a pinpoint and the resilience that grew to fill its place. The lawyer sits quietly, eyes lowered. He's read this letter already. He knows what's coming. Your parents do not. As your words describe the moments they failed to show up, not just for you, but for themselves, you sense the first tremors of regret beneath their practiced masks. There's a line near the end, one you debated including, "You wrote, 'You always taught me to leave things better than I found them.' I hope this letter does the same for you." You imagine their faces in this moment, confused, maybe wounded, but also forced to reckon with the story they tried to ignore. When the letter is finished, the room is heavy with silence. Your parents sit frozen, not quite sure how to proceed. The lawyer folds his hands and waits. The assets are still locked, the future still unwritten. But for the first time, your parents have to look at each other and themselves without distraction. You are gone, but you are not absent. Your words linger louder than any inheritance, echoing through the room, long after the envelope is placed back on the table. The lawyer's next words are measured almost gentle, but they land like hammers. He explains that the letter you left isn't just for reflection. It's a legal document attached to a new will drafted in the months after your diagnosis. Your parents' postures stiffen, bracing for bad news. They expect formality and apology, a technicality, maybe a brief delay before the windfall. Instead, what follows is the slow, deliberate detonation of every assumption they've made about you. He reads aloud the section you drafted in sleepless hospital nights, your language unflinching. My parents taught me early that love could be rationed, that warmth could be earned and revoked, that safety was conditional. I wish I had learned something softer, but I write this letter not with bitterness, but with truth. You listen as the lawyer's voice wavers, then steadies as your parents sit straighter, unsure where this is going. Your mother interrupts, trying to reclaim control. Surely that's not, she says. But the lawyer silences her with a raised hand. The deceased's final wishes he intones must be respected. It is the first time anyone in that room has spoken about you with real authority. Your parents, so accustomed to steering every narrative, are suddenly at the mercy of a voice they can't interrupt and a story they can't rewrite. As the letter unfolds, the focus shifts. You detail the names of the people who showed up, nurses who held your hand, friends who texted through the pain, the neighbor who dropped off groceries when no one else remembered you existed. For every act of kindness, you allocate something from your estate, a collection of small bequests, each one purposeful, personal, impossible to contest. To your parents, you leave not the comfort of money, but the discomfort of being named, of being seen exactly as they were. The letter continues, revealing the legal twist you planned. The remainder of your inheritance will not go to your parents, but to a trust managed for the benefit of those who demonstrated love and loyalty when it mattered most. A scholarship for nurses, a grant for young patients without family, a donation in your name to the ward where you spent your final days. Each allocation is described in detail, your tone both loving and sly. For those who gave when it wasn't convenient, who stayed after visiting hours, who made the world feel a little less cold. Your parents are stunned into silence. Your father's face goes red, your mother's eyes darting as she searches for some loophole, some path around your final act of defiance. But the letter is airtight, reviewed by lawyers, signed and witnessed a fortress of intention. Their grief turns brittle, their anger too fragile to voice in front of the lawyer. You can almost hear them thinking, this can't be happening. This wasn't how the story was supposed to end. You linger in the room unseen, but present as the truth of your choices settles in. For years, your parents thought of you as a means to an end, a line in a will, a chapter in their legacy. Now they must grapple with a legacy that refuses to comfort them, a narrative that names their absence and makes it permanent. And as the meeting ends and the lawyer gathers his folders, your parents sit motionless, unable to summon the outrage or tears they rehearsed. The world outside goes on, but for the first time they are alone with the one thing they tried hardest to avoid themselves. The days that follow feel like a slow motion unraveling. Your parents try to regain their footing, shifting from denial to damage control. They call the lawyer's office, questioning details, searching for errors, convinced there must be a loophole hidden somewhere in the fine print. Their calls go unreturned. Their arguments meet nothing but the steady, unflappable calm of legal clerks repeating, "These were the final wishes. Nothing can be changed." At home, the silence is heavier than before. Your mother wanders the halls, phone in hand, replaying conversations she's had with friends and relatives, scrambling to reframe the story. Your father spends hours in his office, staring at paperwork that will never again include your name in the places he hoped. They avoid each other's eyes, haunted by the echo of your letter. The words you chose play in their minds, surfacing at the worst moments over coffee in the quiet, before sleep in the empty seat at the table. News spreads faster than they expect. The lawyer doing his legal duty notifies every beneficiary, your nurse's friends, the neighbor from down the street. Your story becomes a local curiosity, a whispered headline. People talk. Did you hear what happened with the inheritance? She left everything to kindness. Some shake their heads, others nod in understanding. No one looks at your parents quite the same way again. Family members start calling some out of genuine concern, others hungry for gossip. Your aunt leaves a voicemail, her voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "How could you let it come to this?" she demands, as if there's still time to fix things. Old friends reach out with cautious sympathy. Their support for your parents measured, their questions pointed. Were you really that distant? Did you know how alone she felt? The inquiries sting flay away the last scraps of the narrative your parents tried to protect. Your mother tries to mount a defense, claiming there must have been manipulation, that you were confused or coerced. But every document, every note, every memory held by those who actually stood beside you paints a different picture. The trust you created sends out its first scholarships, your name appearing on plaques in hospital corridors, and thank you letters from strangers. The legacy grows untouchable, irreversible, a quiet celebration of everything your parents failed to be. The neighborhood too changes. Neighbors who once smiled at your parents with shallow politeness now avert their eyes, or worse, offer thin, knowing looks. There are no casseroles, no gentle condolences, only a subtle withdrawal, a pulling away. Your parents, so used to the comfort of being admired, now feel exposed, seen in ways they never wanted. They turn on each other, the tension fracturing old alliances. Blame is traded in whispers and arguments behind closed doors. Each tries to piece together where it went wrong, sifting through the past for moments when they could have chosen differently. But regret is not a salve. It's a splinter working deeper the harder they try to pull it out. Amidst the chaos, your letter endures, framed ironically in your father's study, a reminder he cannot bear to read but cannot throw away. The world they built with your absence now echoes with your presence. You have become the story they must tell again and again, never able to rewrite the ending you left behind. And somewhere far from all of this, you are finally at peace, not out of vengeance, but because you spoke the truth no one else would say. As the weeks turn to months, the shock fades, replaced by a cold, persistent ache. Your parents drift through their days as if underwater, heavy and slow, each movement burdened by the knowledge that nothing they do can reclaim what they lost. Invitations dwindle. Family gatherings become strained, empty rituals. At each event, a seat is left conspicuously open, a subtle reminder to everyone present of the missing piece they let slip away. The calls from the lawyer become routine, now reminders of the trust dispersing its first scholarships of new recipients, whose names your parents do not recognize. Each letter stamped with your name is a fresh wound, a proof that your memory will survive in places they'll never be welcome. Your mother tries to collect small victories. A family photo dusted off and placed in the living room, a new set of charity donations in your name, letters drafted but never sent. Yet every gesture rings hollow. The world is watching and she feels it. Friends and acquaintances step back not out of cruelty, but because the truth is uncomfortable. Some speak in hushed tones, dissecting your parents' choices, while others avoid the topic altogether. Even the grocery store feels different. The cashier who once chatted about your school days now simply bags the groceries and offers a soft, uncertain smile. Your father, once so sure of his own rightness, starts to unravel at the edges. He spends more time alone, his once orderly office, a clutter of unopened mail and abandoned projects. Sometimes he rereads the letter, searching for loopholes or even signs of forgiveness between the lines. There is none, only the steady, unwavering record of absence. Your mother, meanwhile, takes to long walks retracing the same neighborhood paths you wandered as a child. She studies the faces of strangers, wondering if any of them were the ones who brought you groceries or sent you those texts she never bothered to read. The letter's power grows. With every passing day, its truths impossible to escape. Some relatives reach out offering olive branches to your parents, awkward invitations for coffee, tentative suggestions that maybe you should talk to someone. Your mother attends therapy once or twice, but finds no comfort in the clinical reassurances. Time heals, the counselor says, but your mother knows better. Time only magnifies the quiet spaces where love should have been. Meanwhile, your legacy spreads not as a warning, but as a quiet example. The nurses and patients who benefit from your scholarships write thank you notes, their stories echoing with the kind of care you always craved. Children who never knew your name now recite it in gratitude, a soft, persistent chorus that refuses to fade. Your parents keep waiting for the story to die down, for gossip to pass, for things to return to normal. But normal is gone. Each day is a lesson in what it means to be seen, not for your wealth or your absence, but for every choice that led here. In the end, your parents learn that an inheritance is more than money. It's the story that outlasts you, the one people choose to remember, and the truth no one can bury. Winter arrives with a hush blanketing everything in a clean, deceptive quiet. Your parents retreat further, the house colder than ever, despite the furnace running day and night. They drift through rooms that echo with your laughter in ways they never noticed while you were alive. Your old things, books, trophies, faded art projects become artifacts, tokens they can neither throw away nor bear to display. Your letter, now infamous, is a shadow on the mantle. Even their dreams are no refuge. Your words creep in, filling the silence with regret that refuses to soften. On the outside, life goes on. The trust you created sends out another round of grants and scholarships. Your name appears on newsletters, hospital walls, community center plaques. Your mother stands at the back of one ceremony, unrecognized, listening to a teenager thank the donor who gave me hope. She wants to speak up to say, "That was my child," but the words never come. Instead, she slips away before the applause, feeling both proud and unmoored. Your father grows quieter, brittle with guilt he can't admit. He avoids phone calls, lets friendships fade. The study where he framed your letter becomes a mausoleum, the air stale with things unsaid. He keeps the blinds drawn, leaving the world to wonder what's changed inside. When he does leave the house, he takes long, meandering drives, often passing the hospital where you spent your last days. Sometimes he parks outside, engine idling, staring up at the windows. He imagines you in every room alone, waiting brave. They rarely talk about you directly, but your presence binds them. Meals are silent, TV blaring to drown out the memory of your voice. Your mother tries to reconnect with old friends, but they keep their distance, wary of the frost she carries now. Relatives visit less often, unsure how to comfort parents who never learned to comfort a child. At family gatherings, your absence is a quiet scandal, the kind that needs no words. A neighbor stops by one afternoon carrying a thank you card from a scholarship recipient. Your mother opens it in the hallway, reading the careful handwriting that begins, "Because of your child's gift, I have a chance." For the first time in months, she lets herself cry silent tears. She wipes away before your father can see. He finds the card later, holds it for a long moment, then tucks it inside the frame with your letter. He doesn't say anything, but that small act changes something between them. In the darkest weeks, your parents finally begin to talk, not about money or lawyers, but about memories, about the years they wasted chasing status, about what might have been. They share stories they've never told, piecing together the childhood they let slip by. It's painful, awkward, full of apologies, too late for you to hear. Yet in these late-night conversations, they face each other honestly for the first time in years. Your legacy grows not as a monument, but as a gentle echo reaching places your parents never could. The world moves forward, and you move with it, woven into lives that bloom, because you chose to speak up, to love, to leave something behind. Your parents live with that truth every day, that you were never truly gone, not as long as your story is told and your letter remains. Spring creeps in tentative but relentless green shoots, pushing through frost sunlight, sneaking into even the gloomiest corners of your parents' house. They feel it too, this slow thaw, though neither says so aloud. Your mother clears out a closet and finds your old raincoat pocket full of notes from a school play she never attended. She sits on the floor reading each scrap, piecing together a version of you that feels both familiar and impossibly distant. Your father, shaken by months of silence, finally accepts an invitation to speak with the trust manager who oversees your legacy. He goes alone, a stiff suit, pressed for the occasion, unsure whether he's coming as your parent or as a stranger to your memory. The manager, a gentle woman with kind eyes, tells him about the children you're helping the wards being renovated, the staff who remember your kindness on the worst days. She doesn't judge or blame. She simply shows him what you've become, a lifeline, a story of hope, a name spoken with gratitude instead of loss. Something in him breaks and then slowly begins to mend. He starts spending more time outside tending the yard you once ran through barefoot, coaxing new life from the tired soil. Neighbors pass and wave, some with warmth, some with awkward hesitation, but he greets them all sometimes, pausing to ask about their children, their health, their lives. He is learning late to care in ways that matter. Your mother volunteers at a food bank, her first real act of service not motivated by appearances or obligation. At first she feels exposed, but as the weeks go on, she finds small comforts, shared laughter in the kitchen hands, busy with tasks, gratitude exchanged in shy smiles. The work is humbling. She talks about you sometimes with a volunteer who listens without judgment. "I wish I'd seen her," your mother whispers, "for who she was, not just who I wanted her to be." In these new routines, your parents begin to stitch together a fragile truce. They share more meals, open more windows, fill the house with air and light they'd forgotten how to welcome. They keep your letter creased, now reread so many times, it feels like a prayer on the mantle, not as a warning, but as a promise. "We can do better," your mother says one evening, her voice barely audible. Your father nods, and they let the quiet settle comfortably between them. Your legacy's ripple effects keep spreading. Scholarship recipients send updates, a graduation photo, a new job, a note about passing the kindness forward. The world moves forward, and in some small, persistent way, your parents move with it. The pain doesn't vanish, but it softens shape now by the knowledge that grief, when faced, can be the beginning of something honest. For your parents, the hardest truth is also the most liberating. They cannot change the past, but they can choose what kind of story they live from here. And in living differently, they finally begin to understand what you tried so hard to teach, even if it took your absence and a letter to break the silence. Summer arrives bold and bright, gilding every memory and regret with golden light. The house, once fortress, now sanctuary, has changed in subtle ways. Your parents rise early each day, bookended by small, careful rituals. Your mother tends the flowers you once picked for her, arranging them in sunlit corners. Your father takes long walks sometimes, stopping by the hospital, where your name glows from a donor's plaque. The weight of your letter remains, but it's lighter now, no longer a chain, but a touchstone. Family comes to visit, hesitant at first, but warmth grows in the shared work of repair. Old wounds are acknowledged, sometimes even spoken aloud. In your absence, your parents find new ways to give, to nieces and nephews, to friends' children, to causes that echo your own. They discover the peace of showing up quietly, with presence instead of grand gestures. The story of your inheritance, once scandal, now softens into legend, something people whisper about, not in judgment, but with a kind of awe. Your mother begins writing letters of her own, not just to you, but to those she's wronged or left behind. She apologizes, sometimes clumsily, but with honesty. Your father joins a support group where for the first time he says your name aloud, voice breaking but steady. They attend the scholarship ceremony this year, standing in the back, faces bright with pride and humility as a new student accepts your award. Their home is no longer a shrine to regret, but a place where love at last feels possible. They host neighbors, plant a tree in your memory, and welcome the laughter of children. Some days they still grieve, but the grief is tempered by gratitude, the knowledge that even loss can become a gift if you let it teach you. On the anniversary of your passing, they visit the beach you loved as a child. Your mother lets the waves lap at her ankles, scattering a handful of wildflowers into the tide. Your father stands beside her, eyes closed, breathing in the salt air. Together, they read your letter one more time, letting the words settle gentle as sunlight on water. The world you left behind has changed, not because you demanded it, but because you showed what was possible when love and truth refused to stay silent. Your parents at last understand legacy isn't about money or memorials, but the ways you touch lives that ripple far beyond your own. That evening, as dusk settles softly around them, your parents walk home holding hands. There is peace, not perfect, but earned. They know the story isn't over. They know their lives are better for having learned too late what it means to truly love. Now the story settles like the hush that falls over a house after the last guests have gone. The world grows softer in the blue hour of evening, and all that's left is the gentle truth of what endures when everything else fades. You picture your parents older now sitting together at the kitchen table. The air between them is no longer tight with what's unspoken, but open, filled with the shared understanding that loss is not just a wound, but a teacher. Grief, once sharp and unrelenting, has become a quiet companion, nudging them gently to remember to reach out to change. Across town, the legacy you left flourishes lives, touched hearts, lifted futures shaped by a kindness that was hard-won and honest. The letter that started as an echo of pain has become something softer, a map out of regret, a promise to do better, a story retold in gestures and gratitude. The world goes on, but every now and then a stranger says your name with reverence, not for the way you left, but for the way you lived and loved right to the end. So tonight as you rest, let the weight of all that has been every loss, every longing, every small stubborn act of love fade quietly. Sometimes the truest forgiveness is simply a softer breath, a slower heartbeat, the acceptance that healing isn't always loud or fast, but steady and real. Let the story close with a hush, a pause, a gentle invitation. Some nights just lying still and breathing softly is enough to return home to yourself.